Awesome. Well, thanks for coming out tonight, and I appreciate everyone that made the trip. I just want to thank the ODU History Department, the Norfolk Historical Society, and then also the staff at the Sargent Memorial Collection, just for making this possible. It's quite an experience for me, and I'm just happy to be here. I'd also like to thank Troy Vallos personally for sharing his archival expertise with me, and also just providing guidance throughout my research. His guidance helped me write my paper for Cause and Country, Southern Unionists in Hampton Roads, which will demonstrate that Hampton Roads was home to the Union League Club of Portsmouth, a sizable community of pro-Union Southerners that cultivated an unprecedented level of influence over local politics in the Civil War South. Under the protection of Union troops, the Portsmouth Union League performed three primary functions. First, the League served as what I've called a community watch aspect to their organization. They identified and banished Confederate sympathizers that were living and working in Norfolk and Portsmouth under the thumb of the Union military government. Two, it raised money for the Union war effort. And then three, it functioned as a political vehicle for elevating its members into various regional and local offices. And the following slides will reveal the ways in which the League accomplished these goals in more detail. To begin, I'll share my methodological approach to my work, the key primary sources that buttressed my research, and also the key League members who were major players in unionism in Hampton Roads. The semester-long internship working at the Sargent Memorial Collection allowed me to analyze previously unexplored documents pertaining to organized unionist support in coastal Virginia. A 200-page book of minutes kept by the League contained first-person accounts of the group's weekly meetings, providing key insights into their political ambitions. Portsmouth City Council records provided additional proof League members were actively involved in city government and also held local political offices. And lastly, Union League excerpts published in the Old Dominion, a local Portsmouth newspaper published at the time, are evidence of the League's public profile and their ability to communicate with other community members. Put together, these three sources shed light on the Union League's major players, like William Lyons, who leveraged his high-ranking position at the Gosport Naval Yard to form influential relationships with Union military leaders like General Edgar Thiel and General Benjamin F. Butler. Another person would be John B. McLeod, who, along with Lyons, represented the League on official trips to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, Maryland. And then last, I wanted to feature Daniel Collins, who was a League member and also the acting mayor of Portsmouth at the time from 1863 to 65. So I'll just give you an idea of the level of kind of activity that they were in and sort of the positions that they held. And this little document right there, that's the front page of the Portsmouth League documents. And so Troy was kind enough to scan that for me and wanted to share that with you guys as well. So before we get too far into it, I just wanted to share a little bit of background. What have other historians said about Southern Unionism? So traditionally, historians have described Southern Unionists as a loose-knit, family-based groups of Appalachian farmers who opposed the Confederacy because they had no need nor the financial ability to participate in slavery. John Inscoe in Robert Kinzer's book, Enemies of the Country, New Perspectives on Unionists in the Civil War South, argues this belief. They portray interior Unionists as a small patchwork of anti-secessionists focused on protecting their own families from the retribution at the hands of their rebel neighbors. Unable to organize politically and geographically isolated from more populated areas in the East, interior Unionists of the Upper South and West struggled to act on many of their loyalist convictions. However, the recent work of T.W. Upchurch found that federally protected coastal cities like Jacksonville and St. Augustine, Florida, for instance, proved to be a more favorable setting for an influential group of Unionist lawyers and merchants to assume local political power. As we'll see, the urban Unionist organization described by Upchurch is strikingly similar to the active Unionist presence in coastal Virginia. And I found this really awesome photograph from the Library of Congress, which shows General Seymour's headquarters in Jacksonville. And so they occupied Jacksonville on and off throughout the war, which is also kind of a big difference between occupied Hampton Roads, where the Union military was here from 1862 all the way towards the end of 65. So main themes. With the historiographic background established, let's move on to the three overall themes of my presentation. The first goal is to describe the nature of Southern Unionism, particularly within the context of Hampton Roads. My second goal is to paint a picture of what it was like in Norfolk and Portsmouth during the Civil War, as the Portsmouth Union League would not have existed without the presence of federal troops. And third, my goal is to share the key actions of the Portsmouth Union League and how it shaped local politics in exceptional ways. And that's a front cover of Harper's Weekly from May 10th, 1862, which has colored images of Union forces reoccupying Norfolk. You can see the main street, which is now our customs house. And so again, just to provide a little visual on what was going on at the time. There are several key factors that explain why there is such a strong presence of support for the Union in Hampton Roads. The first factor was the legacy of Whiggish republicanism present in Virginia Tidewater. Republicanism was more prevalent in coastal Virginia due to the relatively smaller slave population and the presence of two-party political competition in the Virginia state legislature. Because of this, there was greater local opposition to secession than there was in Southern Democrat-dominated regions like South Carolina, Alabama, and Mississippi. The second factor was the potential maritime and commercial ties to the North. Virginia Unionists believed a diversified economy which balanced agriculture, maritime trade, and industrial manufacturing was key to future success, not an over-reliance on plantation slavery. Norfolk was an example of what that diversified economy might look like, with its centrally located port facilitating the shipment of grain, tobacco, and lumber to northern cities like Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. The third factor was the presence of Gosport Navy Yard. Now known as the Norfolk Navy Yard, Gosport had been a federal shipyard since 1801, and by 1861, it was the biggest and most advanced facility of its kind in the entire country. Many of the Union League's leaders, like William Lyons, were high-ranking engineers at Gosport and used their positions to recruit new members into the League. And the final factor was the presence of Union troops. As I previously said, Union soldiers protected the League from Confederate reprisals and encouraged the League to maintain a more public profile than their fellow Unionists in Appalachia that really didn't have that safety. And this is a really awesome lithograph of a Union soldier kind of on guard duty in Gosport. You can see it was destroyed by the fleeing Confederates, and then he's actually guarding a line of cannons that they recuperated from sunken vessels in the Chesapeake Bay. So. And here's another image that I wanted to share of Gosport. This is actually courtesy of the Chrysler Museum. And it's an 1862, it's a copy of an 1862 photograph that shows what Gosport looked like after the Confederates destroyed it and ran. So I just wanted to include that for some added detail. Okay, so with my overall themes and background established, let's explore the activities of the Union and Club in more detail. So William Lyons founded the Union League Club as a Republican men's organization on July 29, 1862. Lyons recruited new initiates from the docks, warehouses, and workshops of the Gosport Navy Yard. League members also canvassed the many wharfs along Norfolk's waterfront for like-minded men to join their ranks. The League continued to grow its numbers by admitting Northern troops stationed in Hampton Roads. For example, on September 10, 1862, Lyons waived the traditional initiation requirements to admit 8 infantrymen belonging to the 58th Pennsylvania Regiment, their military service providing obvious proof that they were sufficiently loyal to the Union. Other members hailed from across southeastern Virginia, including Norfolk, Portsmouth, Western Branch, Princess Anne, Suffolk, Isle of Wight. They were local merchants, shopkeepers, carpenters, and farmers who saw the Union League Club as a way to both improve their social station and demonstrate their dedication to the Union. The responsibility of these men were threefold. They rooted out potential Confederate spies, they raised money for the Northern War effort, and inserted themselves into Portsmouth and Norfolk city governments. And that's actually a portrait of William Lyons. Again, thank you to Troy for providing that, because I think that's the only one in existence, so we got that. Let's keep going. And I just wanted to also kind of provide a general kind of overview of like what the city was like at this time. So this, and you're looking down at both Norfolk and Portsmouth. And I think this was circa 1850s, but that just kind of gives you an idea of the hustle and bustle of the area, what was going on, the amount of people and the urbanity of everything. This kind of just puts things into perspective. Okay, so the Community Watch. The League's efforts to curtail Confederate influence in Hampton Roads began in earnest after Union troops captured Norfolk and Portsmouth in early May 1862. One of their first actions involved the identification and removal of a suspected Confederate sympathizer working in the Norfolk quartermaster's office. At a League meeting held on August 15, 1862, James Brownlee, a stonemason from Portsmouth and a city council member, motioned to notify General Egbert Veal that the quartermaster's office was employing a, quote, one Mr. Montague, who has been and is now believed to be disloyal to the United States government. Members Brownlee, James Nolan, and James Booth approached Veal and demanded he remove Robert Montague and the person that hired him from their positions. Veal promised to look into the matter only if the charges were presented to him in writing. Over the next few weeks, the League likely approached Veal with written evidence supporting Montague's removal, as an entry from October 8th confirmed that Montague was, quote, dismissed from this League dismissed from government employ a few weeks before at the suggestion of this League. The removal of Montague from the quartermaster's office reflected the climate of distrust which permeated through recently captured Hampton Roads. The League also took extraordinary steps towards acquiring firearms for the benefit of the League in the protection of Portsmouth. After hassling Veal for weapons for weeks, he acquiesced to the League's demand, and his offer was put to a vote on September 29th, with 12 in favor of tabling the resolution and 11 votes in favor of accepting the firearms. Now, I could never find if they eventually took the firearms or not, but the willingness to at least entertain the idea revealed that their commitment to ridding Hampton Roads of secessionists was strong. Caring for destitute civilians lining Norfolk and Portsmouth city streets was another function of the League. The combined effects of the suffocating Union naval blockade and the lack of food production in the war-torn Confederate interior produced widespread poverty and starvation in Southside Hampton Roads. In Norfolk, up to 3 women and children were dying from starvation per day by June 1862. In similar straits, the city of Portsmouth was feeding nearly 1,200 residents per day in September 1863. The dire situation forced the Union League to act. In January 1864, it created a 12-person committee to search out all cases of destitution in Norfolk and Portsmouth and report these cases to a Captain Edgar, Benjamin Butler's general superintendent of the poor and occupied Hampton Roads. That February, the committee confirmed they, quote, attended to their duties and that Edgar, quote, expressed his approval. Through locating and identifying residents in need of humanitarian assistance, the Union men of Portsmouth not only protected the citizenry of coastal Virginia from Confederate agents, but also provided economic relief to fellow community members. And that's actually the page of minutes that discuss figuring out who Montague was and trying to find out a way to get in contact with Veal to get him out of there. So that's what they were discussing on that page. Fundraising, that's another really key aspect of the Union League Club. So they also raised money for Lincoln's war effort and even recruited volunteers for the Union Army. Beginning in October 1862, Lyons and other League members periodically recruited dock workers, wharf laborers, and Gosport employees into the Union ranks. When Confederate forces appeared to threaten Washington in the fall of 1862, the League searched Norfolk and Portsmouth for volunteers willing to go to Alexandria to defend the capital. Additionally, League minutes from May 1863 show a concerted effort to provide financially for the family of Robert Taylor, a League member who was captured by Confederate troops and imprisoned in Richmond. On May 27th, Lyons formed a committee to wait on Mrs. Robert Taylor in order to ensure that she and her family, quote, do not suffer from the want of the necessities of life. The League also raised money in order to shape the public landscape in favor of the Unionist cause. Through the efforts of William Lyons, the Portsmouth Union League fostered a close relationship to the Grand Union League of Maryland, which was located in Baltimore. In November of 1863, the League wrote to Secretary of War Edward M. Stanton to try to secure the release of Baltimore native and Union Captain Jonathan P. Gleason from a Confederate prison. This effort was to no avail because in early 1864, the Maryland Union League chapter requested funds from Portsmouth to erect a statue honoring Gleason's sacrifice. Men from the Portsmouth League collected over $63, which as I've shown is $1,500 today, which in the middle of a war, an impressive sum to collect. They collected $63 for the Gleason Monument, and then the Monument Association president, William J. Nichols, wrote to the League and said, quote, "My kindest and heartfelt thanks for this noble manifestation of liberality on behalf of the gallant and true man who so nobly sacrificed his life for his country's good." Through its connection with the Grand League of Maryland, Portsmouth's Unionmen helped erect a statue that promoted the Union cause in a city where Unionists and secessionists battled for influence throughout the war. And then that's also a lithograph of Union troops raising the American flag over top of the kind of like main square of Portsmouth. So I'd have to imagine that's right along what's now High Street. All right, so getting to the thick of it now. These are the political activities that I wanted to choose. I think these were kind of like the three kind of most influential things that were going on. And so with that being said, despite its insistence on protecting the citizens of Hampton Roads, the League's robust political activities are perhaps its most influential legacy. Its involvement in the infamous Wright Sanborn incident exemplified its ardent loyalty to Lincoln, as well as its lack of sympathy for those deemed traitors. On July 11, 1863, Second Lieutenant Allinson L. Sanborn marched the first U.S. colored volunteers through the streets of Norfolk. While multiple eyewitnesses' accounts differ over the exact details, the records concur that Dr. David Wright insulted Sanborn for parading armed African Americans down Norfolk's Main Street. When Sanborn responded to Wright's insults by striking him across the face with his saber, Wright pulled his revolver and shot Sanborn to death in the street. The highly publicized crime reflected the intense anger between pro-Confederate white citizens and their Unionist counterparts. Dr. Wright was quickly arrested, found guilty, and imprisoned in Norfolk's Custom House on Main Street to await his fate. Local Unionists quickly began campaigning for Wright's execution. The Portsmouth City Council unanimously passed a resolution deriding Dr. Wright as a, quote, disloyal man. The Union League itself joined in, drafting resolutions which condemned Wright in the leniency of the military government. The complete resolutions demonstrated the League's fervent devotion to the Union and contempt for secessionists. And I just want to share a little quote, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just gives you an idea of how kind of fervent and devoted they actually were. So, quote, "That while we are made sad by the untimely death of Lieutenant Sanborn and mourn the loss of a lover of his country and mankind, we are impressed with the belief that cruelty and ingratitude on part of the rebels is the necessary consequence of a kind policy towards them, and that we are therefore less surprised to know that the murder was committed than it was not perpetrated sooner. Nothing short of the execution of the murderer will meet the ends of justice and bring traitors in our midst to appreciate the magnitude of their guilt in warring against the most munificent of all governments." So that was their statement, basically decrying Wright's murder and wishing for his execution. Very strongly worded. The League would ultimately publish the resolutions in the Old Dominion and even wrote to Abraham Lincoln to request Dr. Wright's execution. Through the efforts of the League, federal officials, and then other local Unionists, Lincoln upheld the guilty verdict and Dr. Wright was hanged on October 23, 1863. The League's involvement influenced judicial events that possessed national significance. I mean, even Lincoln's throwing his hat in the ring about this. The firestorm surrounding Sanborn's death was hardly the League's first foray into regional political debate. Portsmouth City Council meetings spanning from 1862 to 64 revealed that at least 12 League members were also elected and appointed officials in Portsmouth City government. For example, I previously mentioned him, Daniel Collins. He was a shipwright and League member since 1862, and he was elected mayor of Portsmouth from 63 to 65. Another prominent League member, Philip Guard Thomas, would eventually become mayor from 1870 to 71. And then also League men like George Washington Fouth and William F. Parker, just to name a few, occupied minor positions such as clerk of the court and school commissioner. The other big thing locally was a municipal election that was held on April 2nd, 1864. And it gave the League another opportunity to embed more of its members into the local government. The League undertook multiple initiatives aimed at preserving its influence over the city council. On January 19th, 1864, so a few months before the election, the League nominated Robert Bunting to print and secure 1,000 election tickets for the upcoming election. The next day, the League authorized Bunting to secure military guards for each precinct, which was likely an attempt to populate voting sites with federal soldiers in order to dissuade potential Confederate sympathizers from voting in the election. As their election neared, the League continued its electioneering campaign. During their December 18th, 1863 meeting, vigilance committees were created for Portsmouth, Jackson, and Jefferson wards. The exact nature of these leagues or these committees was unknown. However, on January 27th, 1864, the members of these communities, quote, gave in their report stating the League's majority in each ward and spent $9.50 to carry out their duties. Whether they simply polled voters or more forcefully persuaded people to vote for their candidates remains to be seen, but the League seemed confident that they had the political backing of Portsmouth citizens before the April 64 election. Additionally, records indicate that the League was involved in counting the votes after the election as well. On April 6, 1864, 4 days after the election, member John B. McLeod motioned for the League to, quote, aid J.C. Neville in purging the polls of the illegal votes cast at the last election. Jonathan C. Neville was the acting president of the Portsmouth City Council, and he had been a prominent member of the council since 1862. While direct evidence proving the League ultimately helped Neville purge votes has not yet been discovered, I'd love to find that. Neville's connection with the League and his high-ranking position on the council suggests that there was a close working relationship between the League and the civilian government that one could argue was a conflict of interest, to say the least. And then my last point, the endorsement of Abraham Lincoln. League President William Lyons was involved in the national political arena as well. The Maryland Union League invited Lyons to attend the Union Party convention as a delegate, which was held in Baltimore on June 7th and 8th, 1864. There, the Union Party, which was the temporary name Republicans gave their party to differentiate themselves from the Peace Democrats, nominated Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson for the presidential ticket. Lyons acted as Portsmouth's representative and drafted a set of resolutions which endorsed Lincoln for re-election upon his return. The complete resolutions were published in the Old Dominion and the Virginia State Journal, which was a paper published in Alexandria. And they uncovered unique insights into the Portsmouth League's fondness for Lincoln and their ideas regarding loyalty and patriotism. And right here on this slide, that's actually the resolutions printed in the Old Dominion newspaper from, I believe it's June 22nd, 1864. And I just want to read a little tidbit of one of the resolutions. So, quote, in the re-election of Abraham Lincoln to the presidency, we have a guarantee of the perpetuity of the Union, the preservation of our beautiful and liberal system of government bequeathed to us by our fathers, the crushing out of treason, and the reestablishing of authority and laws of the United States over every foot of its soil. And I wanted to include that quote because it really kind of drives home the point that these Union men saw themselves as Americans. They didn't see themselves as rebels. They saw Virginia as still a part of the United States, despite the fact that it was in open rebellion. Lyons' attendance at the 1864 Union Party convention proved that the League enjoyed access to the national political arena and was at least a presence in Republican politics. The proximity to Washington, the Union military occupation, and professional ties between Hampton Roads and the upper Chesapeake Bay fostered an unprecedented level of interaction between Southern Unionists with areas still within the Union like Maryland and Washington, D.C. All right, so to wrap up, my research has led me to three prominent conclusions. One, that Unionist sentiment was more prevalent in Hampton Roads than previously known, especially among merchants and the working class at Gosport. Two, similar to Unionists in Northeast Florida, the presence of federal troops allowed Lyons to safely form the Portsmouth Union League Club and create a public Unionist community in Hampton Roads. Again, the unique aspect of actually being occupied and having federal troop presence, much like Florida, allowed this organization to prosper more fully. And third, the League leveraged its close relationships to the Union military and city governments in Norfolk and Portsmouth to influence local elections. That was sort of the biggest thing that they were looking to do. They were trying to elevate their members into public office. And so, okay, where do I leave you guys? What are the broader implications? How do my findings reshape our general understanding of Southern Unionism? First, my research shows that the population of occupied Hampton Roads was not ubiquitously pro-Confederate, but was instead divided between Unionist and pro-Confederate factions. Second, the primary sources I analyzed support the notion that Unionists were impressively active along the Atlantic coast, and they were not just found in southern Appalachia. And third, and this is something where I really want to research further, and I think that's where my projects are taking me, is that commercial and cultural activity were central to political staying power. The Portsmouth Union League's maritime and commercial relationship with Baltimore and the Republican ideology shared by its members suggests that there may have been underlying cultural commonalities between the lower north and coastal Virginia that future historians would do well to explore. And with that, thank you so much. And I just want to leave you guys with some further reading too. These are the primary text. You got some homework for you guys, but yeah.
There'll be a test.
Yeah, there'll be a test at the end.